Imagine crossing the threshold of a door that opens onto one of the most complex and controversial conflicts of the modern era, a tangled landscape in which history seems to repeat itself in an eternal cycle of tensions. For centuries, different peoples have clashed for reasons that are often rooted in cultural and religious beliefs, but that reveal much about our own human nature. If you want to discover how this conflict reflects universal dynamics and what we can learn from it, keep listening. Before we dive into the details, let me know in the comments what your first reaction is to this topic. Do you believe that peace is possible? Or do you think that certain conflicts are destined to remain unresolved? Write your opinion. I'm curious to know what you think. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. This way, you will always be updated on the publication of new videos.
Why is what is happening in Israel between Jews and Arabs nothing new? It happens all over the world under different names. Between Hindus and Muslims, between Christians and Jews, only the names change. It is like watching the same drama repeat itself under different costumes, but the plot remains the same. Like an ancient script that only changes the names of the protagonists. In every era and in every place, history is colored with different shades, but the main theme remains the misunderstanding between human groups that fail to see that deep down they share the same nature. If we thought of humanity as a great tree, and the different religions and cultures as branches extending in different directions, we could finally understand that even though the branches reach toward the sky in different ways, the root is only one. However, our vision is clouded by division and rivalry, and this universal drama constantly reminds us that we are still far from global harmony. Before World War II, Jerusalem, where the Rock is located, and the small state of Israel, which had not existed for centuries, were occupied by Muslims. There had been a country called Palestine, but after the war, Jerusalem and Palestine came under the control of American and British forces. It was then that America implemented what I would call the most despicable policy imaginable. It forcibly created a new nation for the Jews, carving out the state of Israel, which had been absent for centuries. Like a tailor who sews a dress with scraps taken from other garments, generating a sense of estrangement in those who must wear it. It is as if, in the attempt to reconstruct a lost story, the choice was made to ignore the original threads of the story. And, in this process, political and military will imposed itself like a great hammer that carves the stone to its liking, without paying attention to the cracks that result. In the past, in the days of Moses, that state had existed. Then for centuries it had been in the hands of the Muslims. The Christians had tried several times to reconquer it, without success, as had the Jews. Yet only 6% of the territory belonged to the Jews, while 94% belonged to the Muslims. How could a sovereign Jewish state be founded on that territory, if not by force of threats and pressure? And in fact, it was precisely under the pressure of the armies that this new state took shape. It is like trying to plant a seed in a land that does not welcome it. If the land is arid or hostile, the plant may even sprout, but it will always remain in a struggle for survival. This is what happened with Israel. A seed transplanted into soil already inhabited by another crop, with deep and consolidated roots. It was a grand strategy, yet it went almost unnoticed, like a snake slithering through tall grass, invisible to those who only look at the surface. In my opinion, America and Britain conspired to establish a Jewish state so that the Jews would remain in a state of perpetual precariousness. And the Jews, deceived, thought that America and England were really helping them, offering them that homeland they had long dreamed of. It is like giving someone a garden, but the garden is on top of a volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. One could also say that it is a poisoned gift, wrapped in great bows of rhetoric and promises, but containing a mechanism of slow destruction. And so the Jews, driven by the desire to rediscover their lost identity, found themselves in a situation that would expose them to uninterrupted conflicts. Meanwhile, America has killed two birds with one stone. In the United States, in fact, Jews are among the richest and have great power in the American Senate thanks to a strong lobby. Since politicians depend on donations from the wealthy for their election campaigns, they cannot ignore the presence and money that Jews have. In this way, the funds are directed to American politicians who created the state for the Jews and, at the same time, consolidated their relationship with the Jewish community in the United States. It is as if American politicians had discovered a gold mine and, to maintain access to it, decided to offer a huge favor, knowing that this would generate a cycle of debt and gratitude. In this tangle of interests, the moral and historical question fades into the background, suffocated by the logic of power and money. But this state was imposed by force on Muslims. Imagine building a house in the middle of a village that has existed for centuries, evicting the original inhabitants. They cannot but be resolute and deeply hurt. From here arises a conflict that seems to have no end. Israel must buy weapons from the United States, while American Jews send huge sums of money to support the survival of the Jewish state. In this way, always in my view, America has harmed the Jews more than Hitler did, not with a single massacre, but with a conflict that perpetuates itself, like a fire that smolders beneath the ashes and reignites every time the wind changes direction. We can see this dynamic as an infected wound, which is never deeply healed, but only covered with a plaster, destined to come off at the first contact with external reality. It is a subtle plan. As long as there is a single Jew in Israel, tensions will remain high. And American politicians can withdraw their support at any time, as has happened in the past, for example, with Taiwan against China. The support was vital for Taiwan, But how far can the loyalty of a superpower that acts only for its own interests go?
It is like an unwritten contract, held together by promises and momentary conveniences. A breath of different wind is enough, and everything falls apart. This scenario teaches us that political alliances are often similar to sandcastles, apparently solid, but incapable of resisting the next wave. And Israel, from this perspective, becomes a geopolitical outpost that must continually demonstrate its usefulness to its creators, in a spiral of tension and mutual dependence. Ultimately, it's like a large orchestra where everyone plays a different instrument, believing that their melody is the only one worth listening to. But until you learn to play in harmony, all that's generated is noise and conflict. The earth is the same for everyone, and dividing it with fences and flags is like trying to divide the air, a choice destined to provoke endless clashes. Yet, until we recognize the illusion of these borders, both material and mental, we will continue to stage this drama of misunderstanding, struggle, and endless pain. We can imagine a world in which religions could be considered as different paths leading to the same truth. In that case, harmony would not be an impossible goal, but a horizon to strive for. However, today, rather than a common horizon, the world scene appears fragmented by egos and interests, where the purity of spiritual research is often overshadowed by the desire for power and personal affirmation. If we really want to break this age-old cycle of violence and resentment, we must begin with mutual understanding. We must look within ourselves, because global conflicts are the reflection of the inner conflicts of every human being. As long as our minds are divided by prejudices, by conceptions of superiority, and by the fear of the other, we will continue to generate small outbreaks of war in every word, in every look, in every action. And these outbreaks, combined on a global scale, explode like inextinguishable fires. That is why the key is not only political, it is also spiritual. It is the growth of individual awareness that can lead to collective maturation. When we understand that the happiness of one depends on the happiness of all, and that the pain of the other is also ours, perhaps then we can begin to build a world in which conflict is no longer the norm, but the exception.
Now it's your turn. Share in the comments your perspective on this conflict and what inner or collective steps you think can bring us closer to peace. Every opinion is a seed of awareness that can sprout in the heart of the reader.